Hello and welcome to the show. We are back finding out if more vehicles will roll over. And we start today with the racing truck. This a highly requested vehicle. I'm afraid I couldn't do the Formula 1 car or the FXXK because I don't have the money to buy them yet on Forza. I will have a go with those at some point. But yeah, the racing truck, an interesting one. Theoretically, shouldn't be too difficult to roll. It's got a very high centre of mass. It's a truck, after all. So I was confident that I could get this to roll. In some ways, I expected it might roll over standard. I mean, it's got racing slicks on the vehicle from standard, which is good for grip, and that high centre of mass shouldn't be too bad for making it tumble over. Unfortunately, the truck, relatively soft suspension, and as we have seen time and time again, soft suspension doesn't really quite work. In fact, the first attempt would be the best attempt I would get. Second attempt, also not too bad with the rather grassy approach to it. But, yeah, as far as tumbling over from standard goes, that high centre of mass, you assume that it would because it is a truck, but I have a sneaky suspicion to make it into a racing vehicle, it has been, well, significantly lowered. Certainly from a standard truck. I tried a few different approaches. I tried a little bit more speed. That certainly wasn't going to work in getting the truck to go over. Also not the easiest of vehicles to get turned around. Even with handbrake assistance, it wasn't necessarily quite so keen on being, turned around. So a little bit scruffy from me. Try as I might, however I hit the curb, it was not really having any of it. I mean, this kind of very tight angle of approach means you don't get very much speed at it, and as you can see in the truck from standard, it's not gonna go. Maybe with a curb at a different place if you could hit it fast enough, hit it hard enough, but certainly here is not going to happen. Now, I didn't have to upgrade the vehicle in any way, shape or form. All I had to do was raise and stiffen the suspension, give it as much camber as we possibly could. Didn't have to go for tyre pressures at all. And that would be enough to get the truck kind of over. You see, when I've done this series in the past, I had the rule of the vehicle had to have at least made it onto its roof for it to have counted as a roll. And this proved difficult with the likes of a Ford Transit and so on. But in the truck, it is extra difficult because of the height of the cab. Trying to get this to simply go over is not really going to happen. I can't get it, I can't hit this curb with enough speed to get it to kind of go over fully. It's always going to skid along the road on its side because of the positioning of the curb. As much as I tried throwing the vehicle at it from different angles, it was never quite enough to get it all the way over because, yeah, the cab is so tall. I mean, I get it to do to roll onto its side relatively consistently, got it to bounce off of the tyre bundle, but getting it onto its roof was not quite happening, which, yeah, it's a shame. I think this attempt would be the best that I would get the truck. It kind of goes over because it skids along on its side, it catches the grass. It sort of twists rather than roll. I don't know whether you'll count it as a roll or not, audience. You will have to be the deciding factor on there, whether the truck will count as having been completed or not. I mean, I'd kind of say it would with the final one. It certainly was going over. Up next, we have got a Porsche, the 911 GT2 RS. Interesting differences with this car being rear-engined. Whether that would make any impact whatsoever on the vehicle's ability to roll over. Now, again, this is a, well, track monster, really. Grip level's good. The sort of suspension and chassis would be relatively stiff, but also very, very low centre of mass. In the fear, certainly much like we saw with the Centenario, like we saw with the McLaren, or like we saw the McLaren race car with the BMW touring car, is the vehicle going to be very, very low, and the likes of the front splitter and so on catching on the floor and preventing the car from rolling over. The very first attempt, relatively promising. I tried with the more speed and throw the car at the curb, get some airtime and so on. I mean, it didn't work for rolling, it was certainly spectacular. The secondary curb on the outside, where we saw the Centenario tumble over, we actually got a fairly big bounce off of that with the standard Porsche. But yeah, standard-wise, I don't think we would see this, this car roll. There was some promise, it certainly wasn't the most impossible looking of vehicles. It got up onto its side. It was never far enough or long enough on its side to go over, but it did actually get up onto its side a decent amount for a vehicle like this. Tried a few times throwing the car at the curb, some different angles, varying degrees of speed. You see, when it gets up onto its side, there's just not enough grip. It was kind of sliding across the road on two wheels. There's just not enough grip to get it to go over fully. So yeah, standard is not going to happen. Now, it didn't have to do, I say didn't have to do too much upgrades. Race tyres were fitted to the vehicle. Suspension was already adjustable, so it didn't have to upgrade the car. Again, it was tuned. The suspension raised, stiffened, camber added, etc. as we would expect. Didn't go for tyre pressures. Initially, I was curious to see whether we would need to or not with the car. The very first attempt was not looking amazingly promising, but admittedly perhaps slightly misaimed by me. The second, sort of slightly slower attempt, still got the car a long way onto its side. You don't need very much speed to get the cars necessarily to roll over on this curb if you hit it just right, although I wasn't having the best of luck with the Porsche. I thought I was hitting it pretty well, and it was doing kind of what I expected it to be, in many ways, be a little bit stubborn to go over. If anything, it wasn't quite going up as far onto its side as the likes of the BMW or the likes of the Centenario. I tried launching the car at the curb. We get a good distance on two wheels, and it does tumble over on the sort of secondary curb. Now, we've seen a couple of vehicles roll over on that curb, and that's not really a grass roll, because the curb is the thing that launches it onto its side initially. So, technically, the Porsche had gone over, but I was curious to see if I could get it fully rolling without any shadow of a doubt, shall we say, with the roll. So I tried a few more times. It still wasn't looking massively promising, which is perhaps a little bit odd for this car, because it did eventually go for a tumble. No grass involved whatsoever in all of that. For the longest period of time, it wasn't really showing a huge amount of promise. I was expecting to have to go start fiddling with tyre pressures and maybe even have to start messing around with other things to set it. But once I'd got that angle perfect, it was enough to send the Porsche over. So yeah, 2 rolls with the 911. Wasn't quite expecting that result, but there is a very, very specific line that if you can get just right across that curb, will be enough to send the vehicle over. Our next contender, the Dodge Demon. Now, a couple of interesting things with this particular vehicle. Of course, it is very, very powerful, very quick. From standard, it has some sort of drag tyres on the car. Now, that is good for acceleration, that is good for traction, but it's not so good for actual corner grip. It's not so good at all for carrying corner speed, and it's also a little bit soft and wallowy. So, as far as rolling over from standard goes, I wasn't holding my breath with this particular car. What I wasn't quite expecting was just how soft the suspension was. There was just no movement, really. I mean, it reacts across the curb as you would expect a vehicle to. It kind of reacts sensibly in terms of dealing with a curb, but for what we are trying to do here, we don't want sensible. And yeah, the Demon was never ever going. I think the inside wheels were barely lifting off the ground. Even if I hit the curb right, it's just it's not gonna happen. Now, this isn't helped by the drag tyres. The drag tyres were not good for this. The way that we're getting the cars to roll, the way that I'm getting the cars to go over, involves the vehicle having an awful lot of grip. The more grip that it has, and especially the more grip that it has when it does get up onto its side, the better. And that's very much needed. I tried launching it across the curb, and there is just so little steering in this car. So little steering that I can't really throw it at the curb properly. And in all of this, in the couple of minutes that I've been trying here, I'd got my tyres to about 30% tyre wear on the rear, 20% on the front. The tyres were starting to die on the car. That's how poor the drag tyre life was. So, upgrade shop time it was. Had to put the car on some racing slicks. And again, suspension was upgraded and tuned, because there's kind of information that could have been gleaned from the opening runs was pretty useless. It was just, yeah, not helpful, and sure enough, first time, the Demon would go tumbling over. Which, perhaps not most surprised to see it go over, having been upgraded in this particular manner. I do seem to have very good luck with getting the cars to roll over on their first attempt. I don't know what it is. After I've upgraded them, it always seems to be the first attempt is probably the best one. I had a couple of runs with throwing the car at the kind of with the faster approaches. It didn't really show much promise. Didn't really look like it would roll from those particular angles. It's a lot more difficult to hit the curb hard enough from those to really get the Demon to go over. But, yeah, it certainly didn't look like it was ever going to tumble over. We did eventually get a second roll out of the car. It was a more spectacular roll as well. So, yeah, was repeatable, unlike a lot of the times where I've had very good luck on the first couple of runs. Did manage to get it to go over later on. Yeah, as far as the alternate approaches go, you can't hit the curb hard enough with the Demon to get it to go over, and I don't think it quite has enough grip when it gets up on its side to actually go over. One thing I was impressed with is just how vicious this particular roll is. It's such a fast roll, like from the time of hitting the curb to the car being on its side and having gone over. It's rolled before it ever even got near the grass. It's, I think, one of the most vicious rolls that we have seen so far from the Demon, so it definitely gets bonus points for that. And the final vehicle to take on this challenge today would be a NASCAR. People want to see me try with one of these, and I'm always up for a challenge. Again, it's another racing vehicle, which is good for chassis stiffness and good for potentially grip, of course. More designed around oval racing, but with, you know, it's still used at normal circuits. It's got slick tyres from standard, which is helpful. It does also have the anti-rollover flaps. Now, they are very useful for if the car spins out at high speeds. I was wondering whether they would be deployed when I was doing all of this, but we're not going very quickly, because it's all about the angle you hit the curb at more than it is actually about the speed, and they're useful for if the car gets turned going sideways, and if it's spun. They don't so much useful for a car going up on its side. So we're not likely to see them. I mean, they do work on the vehicle, and I love as it gradually goes behind the wall, you can only see the flaps on the top sticking up. Yeah, they do work, and they are entertaining things to watch flap around on the vehicle, but they're not going to have any effect with the challenge that I am doing here. In terms of getting the car to roll over, much like we've been seeing with a lot of vehicles today, it wasn't particularly keen on going from standard. Relatively soft suspension. Softer suspension than I was expecting, actually, on the car. I could fire it onto its side, and it did get quite unhappy with the kind of exit curbs. Those secondary curbs, where we've seen a couple of vehicles being launched into rolls, this would hit them and spin. I don't particularly know why it upset the Toyota quite as much. However, it was a kind of a very repeatable thing. If you hit it if you hit the main curb with enough speed to get it up onto its side, up into the air, again, it would just, yeah, as soon as you touch that curb with the rear wheels, it would not be too happy whatsoever. Now, no need for the upgrade shop on this one, of course, fully adjustable suspension. The only thing that I needed to do, raise and stiffen the suspension again along with the camber. Didn't go for tyre pressures. What helps with this car over the likes of the GT3 cars and other race cars we've had, while it is low and got a splitter and so on, it's not as low. And that not getting caught on the floor meant that, once again, it would be on the first attempt that the Toyota would roll over, and on the way back managed to do exactly the same thing. I was, yeah, kind of surprised again with this one. I thought I might have to at least work a little bit more in terms of trying to get, you know, the right angle for getting the car over. But yeah, first two runs, and the Toyota would go for a tumble, having gone over so easily with the kind of precise approach. I wondered if hitting the curb with a bit more speed, whether this particular angle would be enough to send the car over. Again, it doesn't quite get enough grip, and that's something we have been seeing with these vehicles, in that they're not quite getting enough grip when they're up on the sides to go over from this faster approach. It's launching the vehicle up onto its side, but it's not actually launching it over. So, yeah, the tighter angle is the one to go. Although, interestingly, having rolled it successfully the first 2 times in a row, I then couldn't get it to go over again. Like, in terms of repeatability, I think I used all of my luck on the initial ones, and it became as awkward as I kind of expected the vehicle to be. No matter how I positioned the car, which of the 2 routes that I took with it, it just didn't want to go over again. Now, it is possible that as I ran this, you know, we've been running it for 2 or 3 minutes, spinning the wheels up, setting the car off and so on, maybe the tyre pressures came up from where they started because the tyres got warmer. It might only be by a couple of PSI, but it might have been enough to prevent the vehicle from tumbling over. Either way, it's yeah, something I've noticed with a couple of vehicles to a lesser extent, but it's very noticeable with NASCAR. The longer it ran, the less likely it was to roll over. So there we go. Some interesting outcomes. Either way, all of the vehicle, well, I mean, the truck kind of. Again, I'm leaving that to your judgment, guys, as to whether you think that one counted or or not. Everything else certainly went for a spectacular tumble. That, though, is going to be it for this video. If you have suggestions for cars you'd like to see me try and roll, please do leave them in the comment section, and the most popular ones will get a try next time out. That'll be it from me, though. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.